This is part 10 of our Laravel 13 series. In this tutorial, we'll learn about Laravel validation, why it's important, and how to validate user input before processing it in our application. Now let's create a new view called Add Customer using the artisan command. Instead of creating the blade file manually, we're using an artisan command to generate it. This is a faster and more organized way to create new views in Laravel. Now let's open the Add Customer blade.php file and start building our customer form. Now let's add an H1 heading that says Add New Customer. This heading clearly indicates that this page is used to add a new customer. Now add a form tag and set the method to post. Method post attribute tells Laravel to send the data using an HTTP post request. Now add a text input field with the placeholder inner name. Placeholder provides a hint to the user about what information should be entered into the input field. Now add the name attribute and set it to name. Name attribute is very important because it acts as the key for the input field. Now let's copy this input field and create two more similar input fields. Let's modify the two duplicated input fields. One will be used for the customer's email address, and the other will be used for the customer city. Each input field should have a unique name attribute so Laravel can identify and validate the submitted data correctly. In web.php file, create a route that loads the Add Customer blade view. This route tells Laravel to display the addCustomer.blade.php view whenever we visit the Add Customer URL in the browser. Now let's start the Laravel development server by running the php artisan serve command. This command starts Laravel's local development server. Once it's running, we can open the application in the browser and test our customer form. Perfect. As you can see, our Add New Customer form is now visible in the browser and ready to use. Now let's add a Submit button with the text Add Customer. Then go back to the browser, refresh the page, and test our form. Now open the customer controller and create a function to handle the form submission. When a user submits the form, Laravel will send the form data to this controller function. In the upcoming steps, we'll add validation rules and process the submitted data inside this function. Change function name to Add New Customer inside the customer controller. Whenever the customer form is submitted, Laravel will send a request to this function. Now let's inject the request object into the Add New Customer function. Request object contains all the data submitted through the form. Now open the web.php file and add a post route for the Add New Customer function. This route will receive the form data when the user clicks the Add Customer button and forward the request to the Add New Customer function for validation and processing. Now update the controller name and function name in the route. The route should point to the correct controller and method. This ensures that when the form is submitted, Laravel sends the request to the Add New Customer function. Copy the Add New Customer route and use it as the form's action attribute. Action attribute tells the form where to send the submitted data. It should match the post route we just created in the web.php file. Display the submitted customer name by echoing the name value from the request. This is a quick test to confirm that the form data is being submitted successfully. When we click the Add Customer button, Laravel will display the text along with the customer's name entered in the form. Now let's test in the browser. This time, we'll submit the form without entering any data. As you can see, the form was submitted even though we didn't enter any data. This is where validation comes in. It should not allow empty data to be submitted. Now let's use the request validate method to validate the form data. Validate method checks the submitted data against the rules we define. If any validation rule fails, Laravel automatically redirects the user back to the form and displays the validation errors. Let's add a validation rule for the name field and make it required. Required validation rule checks whether the field contains a value. Now go back to the browser and click the Add Customer button without entering any data. Let's see how Laravel validation responds. As you can see, Laravel has prevented the form from being submitted. Enter a value in the name field and click the Add Customer button again. As you can see, after entering a value in the name field, the validation passed successfully and the form was submitted. Now let's make the email and city fields required by adding validation rules for both of them. By adding the required rule to the email and city fields, Laravel will ensure that all three fields must be filled in before the form can be submitted. Now go back to the browser and test the form again. Try submitting it with one or more fields left empty to verify that all three validation rules are working correctly. As you can see, the empty field validation is now working perfectly. Now enter valid values for the name, email, and city fields, then click the Add Customer button. As you can see, after entering valid values in all three fields, the validation passed successfully and the form was submitted. Let's print the errors variable so we can see the validation error object that Laravel automatically provides. Now let's test in the browser. Now submit the form without entering any data. As you can see, the validation errors are being displayed, but they're not in a user-friendly format. First, let's check if there are any validation errors using the if errors any. Close the if statement by adding the endIf directive. EndIf directive marks the end of the if condition. Now add the for each loop inside the if block, and then close it with end for each. For each loop allows us to display each validation message one by one. This is much cleaner than printing the entire errors object. Let's use errors all to retrieve all the validation error messages and loop through them one by one. Assign each validation error to the error variable using the as keyword. Let's display each validation error message inside a span element. Now go back to the browser and submit the form with empty fields again. As you can see, the validation errors are now displayed, but they're all appearing on a single line. Let's add a BR tag after each error, so every validation message is displayed on a new line. As you can see, each validation error is now appearing on a new line, making the output much cleaner and easier to read. Now enter a value in the name field and click the button. As you can see, the name validation error has been removed. Now fill in all the required fields, name, email, and city. Then click the Add Customer button again. When all the required fields are filled, Laravel passes the validation check and continues the request. Since there are no validation errors, the data can be processed successfully. Fill a name field and click the button. You'll notice that the enter value is cleared after the form is submitted. Let's fix this using Laravel's old helper. Inside the input field, add the value attribute and call Laravel's old helper. This will automatically restore the previously entered value if the form validation fails. Old name helper retrieves the previous value of the name field from a session. If validation fails and the page reloads, Laravel automatically fills the input with the user's previous input. Let's do the same for the email field. Add the old helper to its value attribute so the previously entered email address is also preserved after a validation error. Let's do the same for the city field. Add the old helper to its value attribute so the previously entered city is also preserved after a validation error. Now let's test the old helper. Enter a value in the name field, leave the other required fields empty and click the Add Customer button. You can see, after submitting the form, the value remains in the input field. Enter a value in the email field and click the Add Customer button. As you can see, the email field also retains the previously entered value after the form is submitted. Enter a value in the city field and click the Add Customer button. As you can see, the data has been submitted successfully. Since all the validation rules have been satisfied, Laravel processed the request without displaying any validation errors. Enter any text in the email field and click the button. As you can see, it is not showing any error for an invalid email address, even though the email format is incorrect. To validate the email format, we need to add another validation rule. Let's extend the email validation by adding the email rule. This will ensure that Laravel checks both whether the field is filled and whether it contains a valid email address. As you can see, the email validation rule is now working perfectly. When we enter an invalid email address, Laravel automatically displays a validation error and prevents the form from being submitted. Now we'll add 2 more validation rules, min 4 and max 10. These rules will make sure the input contains at least 4 characters and no more than 10 characters. After that, we'll test the validation in the browser. Now let's test the minimum length validation. Enter a name with only 3 characters and then click the Add Customer button. As you can see, Laravel is displaying the minimum length validation error. Enter a name with more than 10 characters and click the button. As you can see, Laravel is displaying the maximum length validation error. So far, Laravel has been displaying its default validation messages. Now let's learn how to create our own custom validation messages. Let's add a custom validation message for the name required rule. Custom validation messages are defined using the field name followed by the validation rule. Let's create a custom validation message for the name field. Instead of Laravel's default message, we'll display name is required. Oops, we used the wrong operator. Replace the colon with the arrow operator. Now save the file, go back to the browser, and submit the form without entering a name. This time, instead of Laravel's default message, you should see our custom validation message. Leave the name field empty and click the Add Customer button. As you can see, our custom validation message is now being displayed. We'll customize the validation message for the email rule. This message will be displayed whenever the user enters an invalid email address. Set the custom validation message to valid email address is required. We'll display valid email address is required whenever the entered email format is not valid. Now let's test our custom email validation message. Enter an invalid email address in the email field, then click the Add Customer button. As you can see, Laravel is now showing our custom email validation message instead of the default one. This confirms that the custom email validation message is working correctly. We'll customize the validation message for the minimum length rule of the name field. Let's create a custom message for the minimum length validation. We'll use the min placeholder so Laravel automatically replaces it with the minimum number of characters defined in our validation rule. Now save the file, go back to the browser, enter a name with fewer than 4 characters, and submit the form. This time, Laravel should display our custom minimum length validation message. We'll customize the validation message for the maximum length rule of the name field. This message will be displayed whenever the name exceeds the maximum allowed number of characters. Set the custom message to name should not be greater than max characters. Max placeholder so Laravel automatically inserts the maximum number of characters allowed. Now save the file, go back to the browser, enter a name with more than 10 characters, and submit the form. This time, Laravel should display our custom maximum length validation message. As you can see, Laravel is now showing our custom maximum length validation message instead of the default one. This confirms that the name max custom validation message is working correctly. And that's the end of part 10 of our Laravel 13 series. I hope everything is clear and you've learned how Laravel validation works, including validation rules and custom validation messages.